Hello, everyone. I'm Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined by Makone today to give you the first of what will hopefully become a more common occurrence on the Daily Friend channel, and that is the Daily Friend Wrap, a shorter version of the Daily Friend show where we give you the most important and interesting stories of the day in a short format for easy digestion. So let's start off today with a story which I think broke over the weekend, but has kind of picked up some steam outside of the sort of analysis circles. And this is the death of a young child, allegedly due to load shedding. A 3-year-old girl who lived in Johannesburg needed a breathing machine to stay alive, and the inverter which her family had purchased to keep the machine running ran flat due to load shedding, according to her mother. This caused the child to pass away while on the way to hospital. This has caused, as you can imagine, a lot of outrage from people who are very upset at load shedding and the horrific things it's doing to our country and to our lives. And it seems like Musi Maimane has decided to take it, see what he can do in the situation. He says that he's going to be laying criminal charges against the state for what he calls a load shedding death. He said, quote, "I will lay this criminal case. I will keep track and make sure that those who are responsible are made to account for. I refuse to accept how many more children must die. As a Build One South Africa, I don't believe that load shedding is the only pathway for us stabilizing the grid." So I think Build One South Africa was at least supportive of, if not part of, the lawsuit, which said that the state must not share certain areas of the country and have this long list, something that Eskom has said is impossible. Makone, I don't know about you. I always get a bit frustrated when I see these court cases about government failure, because the way to fix government failure is not in the courts.
Definitely. I think if we're going to fix government failure, emptying government resources by dragging them to court is unfortunately not the way to do it. Although you very much can sense the palpable frustration with government failures when there's now human lives being lost at their expense. I mean, this is one, and then you consider all the people that have unfortunately passed as a result of cholera. So I think I'm not persuaded that he has a strong case against government or against Eskom's failures, because again, if we were all to launch these class action lawsuits against government, there'd be no government left. If you can just imagine all the negligencies that must take place, for example, in government hospitals, then I fear to wonder what would happen if
Exactly.
we were all successful.
In fact, on the government hospitals thing, I believe that many health departments' biggest bill that they have to pay is actually lawsuits for for malpractice. So we already get a taste of it just through that aspect.
Agreed. So I'm not sure, like you had already said, that to solve Eskom would be to drain what's left of resources at Eskom. But I'll also be keeping track of how this plays out in court.
Right. So you mentioned the cholera outbreak. I think it's worth talking about very briefly. There have been some developments. Unfortunately, it seems as though at least one person has contracted cholera in the Free State. And I believe that AfriForum says they've detected that there is, in fact, some cholera in the Vaal River now, which is definitely not an improvement on the situation. But more disturbingly, there is some early suggestions, and we saw this, I think, last week, but it seems to have only grown since then, that some of the tankers that supplied water to people in Hammanskraal may have, in fact, had cholera in them. The water tankers apparently had this, that I think they're undergoing testing, but Professor Anthony Turton has said to, I think it was Eyewitness News, that there's some early indications from the forensics teams that it may in fact be the water tankers, which have been supplying Hammanskraal for years now, because the water has been undrinkable at least since, I believe, 2019 in Hammanskraal. This is really not great. I mean, talk about kind of dysfunctional government. First, you have the water system break, and then you have the thing supposed to help people breaking. And even worse, there's an accusation in the Sunday Times that there is now a water mafia to go along with the coal mafia or the construction mafia, who are allegedly sabotaging the infrastructure so that they can get more contracts to supply water, because of course the government doesn't have the resources necessary to supply everyone with water, so it's having to hire these tankers. This is just crazy. It seems like the situation is continuing to deteriorate.
These allegations of a water mafia are just gaining momentum, because I recall first hearing about them when Limpopo itself went through weeks and weeks without water. And there were allegations that people were deliberately sabotaging these water systems in order to get government contracts, which are, of course, very profitable. But I hate to see what is meant to be a solution now be the source of the problem. I think this does not, though, vindicate, if it is indeed found out that the problem is actually with the water tanker and not with the water systems, does not vindicate the state of South African water systems, because they themselves are mostly either in a critical or medium risk or high risk condition. If you look at some of the reports that come out of the Department of Water and Sanitation, you can definitely confirm that it's not just the case with drinking water, but wastewater as well. So it's all round infrastructure failure.
Right. I mean, you kind of have to scratch your head and think what people are supposed to do if the water has been declared since 2019 unsafe to drink. But then the water tankers, which are supposed to provide you with water instead of the water system, are now apparently filled with bad water. So, as far as I can tell, the only hope that very poor people have in this thing is to hope that someone gives them charity. I know that Gift of the Givers has given out some bottles of water, but that hardly seems sufficient for these people.
No, I don't think people can afford to live on drinking water from bottles for extended periods of time, as we've counted now. If it is indeed that it's been since 2019 that Hammanskraals had this problem, it's peak frustration, definitely.
And I think this issue and the load shedding one, they all encapsulate the central problems which affect almost every single government enterprise in South Africa. You've got cadre deployment as part of the ANC, usually using the cover of BEE to push it forward. You see corrupt networks of sort of mafioso and patronage types taking over the entire network and hijacking it for their own ends. And we're very directly now seeing people die as a result of government incompetence. I mean, people have indirectly died from government incompetence for years, but I think in recent weeks we've seen sort of an uptick in more dramatic cases where people are just straight up being killed by the state that can't provide even the most basic of things for them.
Exactly.
All right, let's talk about our last story, and this is relating to the so-called state capture, a term that I think has been misused. I don't know why we used it for when the Guptas apparently bought their way into government. When the term, I think, was first used in our politics by Helen Zille to describe the ANC's takeover of supposedly neutral government institutions, but that's neither here nor there. The US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, has fined Gartner, which is a big American company, $2.4 million for its role in state capture linked to SARS. They have agreed to pay the fine without confirming or denying the findings. According to the SEC, the US the company violated anti-bribery and internal accounting control provisions and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act between December 2014 and August 2015 in its work at SARS. What's kind of a bit frustrating to me about this, Makone, is that, this is not the first time we've seen this. This is a big company where everyone prosecuted with regards to state capture seems to be being prosecuted overseas. And here we had some people with Bosasa, a whistleblower, I think, has gone to jail. And at the end of the day, the Guptas are still high and dry. Jacob Zuma is high and dry. He never served out a proper jail sentence. It's frustrating.
I think you alluded to this motif a bit earlier, but it's the very institutions that state capture sought to undermine and to assault, and they are now failing to come and act on state capture since its occurrence, right? So it's in government institutions that are supposed to hold these actors accountable were the ones that were essentially under assault from these very actors, and now we sort of blame them for their failure to act. But I share in that frustration that there's been very little done. I mean, of course, we uncovered a lot from the State Capture Commission, but the political will that's supposed to succeed that major event to further prosecute these individuals, they've been fumbling every attempt they themselves have made at achieving this. So it's hard to gauge whether, if at all, South Africa will act in any material way against these actors.
Right. And on the State Capture Commission, for a long time, I was really critical of it. I thought that this was mostly just a chop that was going to bring out all of these things and then write a milquetoast report, and that would be the end of it. Thankfully, the report was pretty good. Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, I think, put some really excellent stuff in there, including the stuff about how preferential procurement had really opened this massive door for corruption. And yet, so little has been done. It's just as though it never happened. You know, we learned all these revelations, and it was like I don't know, some kind of therapy session for the country, and apparently not a serious investigation into what the actual problems were. And government has never talked about it again, really.
But then how do you also expect the very people who are incriminated in these reports to act on the reports themselves?
Well, if you believe Ramaphosa and his boosters in the media, he was the one trying to hold back the tide against all of this. He's completely innocent. He's got nothing to do with any of it. So why should it incriminate him at all? I don't believe he came up too much in there, except when he had lost the minutes for all the meetings that he chaired.
Nick, that was the case until a good Arthur Fraser came along. He just blew the lid on that clean image that the president had.
Indeed. But anyway, that's all the time we had for today. So please let us know what you think of this little experimental Daily Friend rap show. We will be back sometime soon. I can't tell you when exactly, but with all that, I guess I'm going to cringe a bit to say this, but I guess that's a wrap.